"I've touched this before," Elias whispered, his fingers trembling over the grain. The young apprentice looked up from sanding, confused. But Elias wasn't speaking to him. He was speaking to the ghost that had just risen in his mind. His calloused hands froze mid-motion, eyes narrowing at the faint swirl pattern etched in the oak. He'd seen that curl once before, years ago, under smoke and firelight. The same rare heartland oak that had burned his son alive. For years, he believed the wood had vanished with the warehouse, reduced to ash like the boy he buried. But here it was, reborn into another coffin, delivered by the same supplier who'd insisted the fire was an accident. His heart thudded in his chest. The hum of the saws faded. The smell of burning oak returned, sharp, invasive. He could still hear the screams at night, the collapse of beams, the distant siren, the silence that followed. Elias lifted the plank and turned in the light, tracing its lines like veins. Beneath the fresh polish, there was a caught deep in the pores. He brought it close, running his thumb along the black dust. "You never forget the dead," he murmured. "Even the wood remembers." That night, Elias sat alone in his workshop, surrounded by unfinished coffins. The lamplight threw long shadows across the floor. Every surface seemed alive, breathing, whispering. He pulled open an old cabinet and found a dusty folder. Warehouse fire, 2004. Inside were photos, yellowed reports, and one small envelope addressed to Mr. Ward. Case closed. His name had been crossed out in pen. Inside was the only thing the investigators had ever returned to him, a single piece of charred wood and a button from his son's jacket. Elias held the wood against the new plank. The patterns matched like fingerprints. His throat tightened. He knew now. The lumber hadn't come from some random storage yard. It came from the same company that built the warehouse. The company that supplied the wood. The company that profited when the insurance paid out. They'd reuse what the fire didn't destroy. They built wealth from ashes. His ashes. He spent the next morning visiting the yard that delivered the wood. The foreman, a heavy man with grease-streaked hands, smiled too easily. "That batch came straight from the district plant," he said. "Same suppliers always, Harlan and Finch." Elias's jaw tightened. Finch. He hadn't heard that name in years. Finch had been the safety inspector the night of the fire. He was the one who testified that Elias's son had ignored safety codes before the explosion. Elias stared at the man's easy grin, the casual tone. He could feel the years of quiet cracking beneath his ribs. "You say same supplier?" he asked slowly. "They've been around that long?" The foreman laughed. "Hell, old man, they own half this town. You'd know that if you ever left this workshop." Elias nodded. "Maybe it's time I did." That night, he returned to the cemetery, walking through rows of marble until he reached a small, unmarked patch near the back. He'd never put up a headstone. It felt wrong to name a grave when justice had none. He sat in the dirt, laid his palm on the cold earth, and whispered, "They're still using it, boy. The same wood, the same hands, the same lies." The wind shivered through the grass, almost like a sigh. He stayed there until the lamplight in the distance flickered out. When he stood, his knees ached, but his resolve had sharpened. He returned home and pulled out an old box of carving tools. The same ones his son had once used to shape toy boats. He picked up the smallest chisel and ran his thumb along its edge. It still cut clean. "If the wood remembers," he said softly, "then it will speak." The next morning, he began carving on the coffin meant for delivery. Not a name, not yet, just symbols, marks only he would understand. A spiral for smoke, a line for loss. He pressed deep into the grain, each stroke careful, rhythmic, deliberate. His apprentice watched from the doorway, uneasy. "Sir, that's not part of the design," he said. Elias didn't look up. "It's not design," he replied. "It's memory." By evening, his hands bled, but the first pattern was complete. The wood surface shimmered faintly under light. The cuts darkened with oil. He sealed it, sanded it, and stood back. The coffin looked ordinary, but hidden beneath its polish was the truth, a language of guilt carved into its bones. Late that night, a knock came at his door. Elias opened it to find a delivery slip pinned to the frame. No messenger, just paper fluttering in the breeze. The order read, Urgent request, 1 casket. Delivery address, Finch Memorial Hall. The pen in his hand hovered, trembling. The coincidence was impossible. Finch Memorial Hall, named after the same man who ruined him. And now, they wanted him to build a coffin for their ceremony. His pulse slowed heavy. A slow smile formed beneath the fatigue in his eyes. "So it goes home," he whispered. He turned off the lights and locked the shop. The silence was deep, steady, and alive. In the dark, the half-finished coffin gleamed faintly like something waiting, not to be buried, but to reveal. As he stepped out into the cool night air, he looked once toward the cemetery and said under his breath, "Tomorrow, we start again." The next morning, Elias began carving names. Not the ones they'd expect. Not yet. The first name was his son's, hidden inside the lid where no one would ever see it. The next would be theirs. He paused, steadying his hand, the chisel gleaming in the sun. "For every lie," he said quietly, "there will be one mark." And then the sound of carving filled the air again, slow, deliberate, like a clock beginning to tick after years of silence. "You knew," Elias said, voice trembling but low, like thunder trapped inside his chest. The old clerk behind the counter froze mid-motion, his pen hovering above the ledger. Elias leaned closer, the smell of varnish and dust stick around them. "You signed these orders. Every plank, every shipment. You knew what they were made for." The man stammered, his glasses slipping down his nose. "Mr. Ward, that was 20 years ago." I don't even remember the details." Elias slammed his palm on the wooden counter, making the pen jump. "But the dead remember," he whispered, "and so does the wood." The silence that followed was suffocating. Behind them, the ticking wall clock seemed louder than breath. The clerk's shoulders sagged. "It wasn't me," he muttered. "They told me to mark the reports closed." Harlan gave the order, said the company would handle the inspection file quietly. The name hit Elias like a blade drawn slowly. Harlan Finch, the same inspector who'd stood before the cameras after the fire, shaking his hand, offering condolences. The same man who told him, sometimes accidents choose their victims. Elias exhaled through clenched teeth. He turned away, eyes fixed on the ledger stacked on a high shelf. "I need access to your archives," he said. "Old purchase records, safety reports, everything between 03 and 05. The clerk hesitated, his fear written in the tremor of his hands. "That's not permitted anymore." The files were, Elias interrupted, "destroyed." His tone was steady, almost kind. "Funny, that's what they said about my son's body." The man swallowed hard and handed him a brass key without another word. In the dim backroom, Elias found what time had failed to erase. Rows of boxes, dusty and forgotten. He opened one, ledgers filled with ink and signatures. Each line carried the same supplier's code. Harlan and Finch Construction, Safety Division. On the margins of several entries were handwritten notes, initials overlapping. HF/WL approved for reallocation. Reallocation, the polite word for theft. He traced it with his finger, feeling the indentation left by a hand that once pressed hard enough to leave guilt in the paper. Elias flipped to the date burned into his memory, April 14th, 2004. There was special order. Fire-resistant oak panels diverted to Finch Storage Lot B. He felt the air leave his lungs. His son had died in a warehouse, supposedly stocked with steel, not wood. The panels meant to protect had never arrived. They'd replace them with cheaper, untreated material, his company's name stamped beneath the purchase. They'd use his credibility to cover their cost-cutting, then let him take the fall. Elias shut the ledger and rested his head against it. For a long moment, there was only his breath, unsteady, breaking through clenched teeth. "You buried him," he whispered, "and you used me to dig the grave." As he left the yard, the sun glared off the metal roofs, white and merciless. Each clang of machinery felt like a heartbeat against his temples. He walked to his truck and sat for a long while, staring at his reflection in the cracked rear-view mirror. His face looked older now, not just from years, but from truth. Back home, he cleared his workbench. The wood dust sparkled in the afternoon light. He opened the ledger beside a new plank and began writing, not with ink, but with the tip of his carving blade. He etched every name he'd found into the inner frame of the unfinished coffin he was building for Finch Memorial Hall. Harlan Finch, William Lane, Thomas Greer, men who smiled in photographs, their hands pressed over the ashes of the innocent. He carved each letter slowly, steadying his trembling fingers, whispering the names like prayers turned curses. The apprentice entered quietly, carrying tea. "You're working late again," the boy said, setting the cup down. Elias didn't look up. "You ever wonder," he said softly, "how many lies can fit inside a box meant for truth?" The boy frowned. "Sir," Elias looked at him then, eyes glassy but fierce. "Every coffin I've ever made was meant to hold peace. This one will hold guilt." That night, he took the ledger and drove to the riverbank where the old warehouse once stood. The land was empty now, paved over and turned into a parking lot. He stood at the edge, the wind howling through steel rails. "You were just 16, he said softly, his voice trembling against the night. "They said you forgot to check the fuse box. They said you ran back for your friend. But I know you, Jacob. You would have followed the rules. You'd never make a mistake that big." He reached into his coat and pulled out a photograph. The two of them smiling on a half-built bridge years ago, his boy holding a hammer too big for his hands. "They burned you to build their comfort," Elias whispered, dropping the photo into the river. "Now it's their turn to feel the heat." The next morning, he visited the town library. The records clerk, a woman in her 60s, greeted him warmly. "Elias Ward, I haven't seen you in years." He smiled faintly. "I'm looking for public safety reports. Finch Memorial Construction, years 03 to 06. Her eyes dimmed. "That's a strange coincidence. We had a request for those just last week." "Who?" he asked quickly. "A young woman," she said. "Journalist, I think. Left her card." She handed him a torn slip of paper. The name printed in black ink made his chest tighten. Lena Finch, Harlan's daughter, the one who had been a child during the fire. His hand trembled as he folded the note. He could see the irony shaping itself. The sins of the father meeting the blood of the victim's kin. He left the library without a word. That evening, back at the workshop, the door creaked open again. But it wasn't his apprentice this time. A young woman stood there, holding the same folder he'd found in the archives. "You've been digging," she said quietly. "So have I." Elias didn't speak. She stepped closer, placing the folder on his bench. "I thought my father was a hero," she said. "Now I'm not so sure." He looked up at her, tired, sharp, certain. "You're not supposed to be sure," he said. "You're supposed to see." She hesitated, searching his face for something. "Mercy, maybe. What are you going to do with what you found?" Elias picked up his chisel again and turned the unfinished coffin toward her. The carvings gleamed under lamplight. Hundreds of names, cuts deep and clean. "Finish what they started," he said. She stared at him, eyes widening slightly as realization set in. "You're not just building it, are you?" His hand stopped mid-motion, the chisel hovering. "No," he said softly, almost a whisper. "I'm preparing it." "You said you just build boxes." "Oh, man. What's this one for?" the apprentice asked, wiping sawdust from his face. Elias didn't answer. His blade moved slow and steady along the wood, tracing a perfect line across the lid. Every motion was deliberate, ritualistic. "It listens," he finally said, his voice flat, distant, "to the hands that touch it, to the hearts that lie near it." The boy frowned, uneasy. "You're scaring me." Elias set the chisel down and looked at him, eyes dry but heavy, as if carrying storms that had forgotten how to cry. "Good," he whispered. "Then maybe you're still worth saving." The boy left soon after, the unease following him out the door like smoke. When the silence settled again, Elias exhaled and turned back to the coffin. Its frame gleamed under the low light, the oak polished to mirror sheen. Beneath that beauty lay something darker, hollow channels carved beneath the base, not for air or structure, but for sound. Tiny brass fittings connected through wires he'd scavenged from an old gramophone. At the headpiece, hidden beneath the decorative emblem, was a recorder the size of a matchbox. He pressed its button. A faint hum replied. It was ready. He sat down beside it, exhausted, his breathing shallow. You'll tell them what they refuse to hear, he murmured to the box. Every name, every lie. That night, the workshop felt smaller, tighter. Rain battered the roof, thunder rumbling in distant rolls. He reached for a photo pinned on the wall, his son Jacob, grinning wide beside an unfinished boat. The edges were burned. Elias traced the outline of the boy's smile with his thumb, whispering, Tomorrow, they'll listen to you. The next morning, he loaded the coffin into his truck. Every groan would seem alive, like the box itself knew its purpose. He drove through town as dawn broke, the world washed in gray. People stared as he passed, the quiet carpenter hauling his own creation to the main street. Finch Memorial Hall stood at the far end of the square, banners fluttering for its annual charity gala. Inside, laughter already echoed off marble walls. The same men who had buried his son's truth would stand on that stage tonight, raising money in the name of safety reform. Elias parked behind the hall and unloaded the coffin alone. The janitor on duty offered a confused nod. Special delivery, he asked. Elias smiled faintly. You could say that. He wheeled it into the back hall, every sound amplified by the marble floor. The wheels creaking, his shoes scraping softly. In the main ballroom, workers set up the stage, floral arrangements, spotlights. Elias watched in the shadows, unnoticed. Finch's portrait hung at the front, framed in gold, the man's smiling face forever untarnished. Elias's jaw tightened. That same smile had been on Finch's lips the day he called his son's death a learning moment. A cough snapped him back. Lena Finch stood by the doorway, arms crossed, eyes sharp. You weren't supposed to come here alone, she said quietly. Elias turned to face her. You gave me access. I gave you a chance, she corrected. Whatever this is, you need to tell me now. He glanced toward the stage. You want the truth? She nodded, eyes narrowing, then helped me lift the lid. Hesitant, she stepped closer. Together they opened the coffin. Inside was no body, only wood wires and the soft gleam of brass. At its center lay a small device, humming faintly. What is it? She whispered. A witness. Elias said, every meeting, every payment, every voice that built their lives. I've been recording them for months. Her eyes widened. You bugged them? No, he said softly. They bug themselves. People like them can't stop talking when they think the world belongs to them. She stared at him in disbelief. You're going to play it? Not me, he replied. You. For a long moment, she said nothing. Her father's name carved into the coffin's side seemed to stare back at her, gleaming faintly beneath the varnish. She turned away, shaking her head. You're asking me to destroy my family. Elias's voice was calm. They already did that for you. I'm just asking you to help bury what's left. Her breathing quickened. She looked down at the recorder, then at him. If I do this, she said, you'll walk away after? He smiled weakly. Walk? No, but I'll stop carving. When the evening arrived, the hall was radiant. Chandeliers glittered, the guests dressed in silk and smugness. Finch's son, now a politician, stood at the podium rehearsing his speech. Tonight, he said proudly, we honor those who build our city's safety legacy. Men like my father, who gave their lives to protect others. Applause followed. Behind the curtains, Elias stood beside the coffin, his face calm, almost serene. He pressed a single switch on the recorder's side. A small red light blinked. Lena walked to the sound booth across the hall. Her hands trembled as she connected the signal wired to the speakers. The host announced, and now, a special tribute, the recorded words of our founder, Mr. Harlan Finch. The applause dimmed into silence. Then came the voice. Harlan Finch's voice, jovial, arrogant, familiar, cut the safety budget. It said, we'll use cheaper panels. No one checks, no one cares. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The next clip followed. Another voice. But, sir, the warehouse. Burn it down if it keeps the auditors quiet. The air changed. Laughter froze. Guests looked at each other, pale and still. Lena gripped the console, eyes wet but unblinking. The next words landed like a knife. Elias Ward's boy? Collateral damage. People forget faster than with burns. The room erupted in gasps and chaos. Some shouted it was fake. Others demanded to cut the sound. But it was too late. The truth echoed through every corner, looping over and over until even silence couldn't cover it. Elias stepped forward slowly, pushing the coffin into view. The crowd parted as if before a grave. He stopped at the stage steps, his voice low but steady. "You called it safety," he said. "I call it sacrifice." He placed his hand on the lid, and the room fell silent again. Lena stood frozen in the booth, tears streaming quietly down her face. Elias turned, meeting her eyes through crowd. He nodded once, almost like farewell. Then he whispered into the microphone near the coffin's base. "Let the wood remember." The lights flickered as the recording faded into a low hum, the sound of fire crackling, the same one that ended his boy's life. Gasps filled the room. Elias turned and walked out. The door closed behind him with the soft weight of finality. Behind him, the hall trembled not from fire, but from the weight of truth finally being heard. "They thought it was just a coffin," Elias whispered as the crowd gathered around the stage, their polished shoes echoing against the marble floor. Laughter rippled through the hall, champagne glasses clinking, music swelling, all dressed in hypocrisy. Finch Memorial Hall glowed under golden light, its chandeliers shimmering above faces that had never known guilt. But beneath that glitter, something darker pulsed, waiting to breathe. Elias stood at the back, still as a shadow, his coat collar high, his hands folded over one another. The coffin he'd built, smooth, immaculate, and engraved with invisible truth, rested in the center of the room. It was draped with a black velvet cloth, a symbol of honor for the legacy of Harlan Finch. Elias's eyes flickered across the hall. He saw them all: William Lane, Thomas Greer, the board members who signed off the fire inspection. Their laughter was sharp, arrogant, like glass scratching metal. He'd waited 20 years to hear it one last time. The host raised a microphone, his voice booming. "Tonight, we celebrate the men who built this town's backbone, heroes who risked everything for progress." The audience applauded. Finch's son, a polished politician, stepped forward, smiling with practiced sorrow. "My father's coffin," he said reverently, gesturing toward the black-draped box, "represents the burden of legacy, the wood from our past, the fire of progress, the bridge between what we were and what we will become." Elias almost laughed. The irony burned like smoke in his throat. He watched as Finch's son rested a hand on the coffin lid, completely unaware that beneath it, wires hummed and the recorder waited, the same device that had captured their confessions. "Would you do the honor, Mr. Ward?" the son asked suddenly, voice echoing. Heads turned toward the old man in the back. "My father always admired your craftsmanship." Elias hesitated, the room thick with breath and light. Slowly he walked forward. The crowd parted instinctively, whispers following him like wind chasing leaves. His boots clicked softly against the marble as he approached the stage, his body upright, his silence heavier than the music that had faded to nothing. Standing before the coffin, he placed both hands on the velvet cloth. For a second, no one moved. "He admired my work?" Elias said quietly. The microphone carried his voice like thunder crawling across a calm sea. "Strange. He buried my son with it." The crowd stiffened. Finch's son blinked, unsure if he'd heard correctly. "Sir, Elias pulled away the cloth. The polished oak gleamed beneath the chandeliers. Gasps rippled through the audience. Every inch of the surface was carved. Deep, intricate lines forming words and names. Dozens of names. The air thickened as people leaned closer. On the lid, in the same clean, deliberate hand, one sentence glowed faintly under the lights. "Truth doesn't rest with the dead. It waits for the living to kneel." A murmur grew into panic. Finch's son reached out, trying to cover the carvings, but the wood was alive with faint sound, whispers rising from the hidden speakers beneath the surface. Voices began to emerge, faint at first, then unmistakable. "Cut the budget. Swap the material. No one will check the safety log. Collateral damage." Each voice distinct. Real. Recorded. The very words they thought had disappeared into time. Screams cut through the hall. Reporters, guests, workers, all frozen as the confessions played like a chorus of ghosts. Elias stood still, the faint smile of a man who'd finally exhaled after decades of holding his breath. "Turn it off," someone shouted. Finch's son stumbled aside, slamming his fist against the coffin. "This is a setup." The mayor tried to cut the sound, but every speaker in the hall echoed the truth louder. The old wood acting as a resonant chamber. "They burned him alive," Elias said softly, his voice steady through the chaos. "And they called it safety." He turned toward Finch's son, his eyes locked like iron. "Your father's company built its empire on ashes. My son's ashes." Cameras flashed as journalists scrambled to capture the scene. The guests fled in whispers and shouts, leaving only the guilty and the man they'd forgotten. Finch's son stepped forward, his face pale, his voice shaking. "You can't destroy everything my father built." Elias nodded slowly. "I didn't destroy it. I revealed what it was built from." For a moment, silence reigned again. Only the low hum of the recorder filled the air. Elias reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded photograph. A boy in overalls, holding a hammer too large for his hands. He placed it gently on top of the coffin. He was 16, Elias said. He built his first chair in that workshop. He trusted me when I said the world rewards honest men. He looked up at the crowd, what remained of it, and whispered, "I lied." The lights flickered, the projector behind the stage flaring to life. On the giant screen appeared blueprints, the original warehouse plans, Finch's signature approving the altered safety codes. Then images of the fire, flames devouring wood, rescue workers carrying what was left. The truth could no longer be unseen. Lena Finch appeared at the edge of the room, her face streaked with tears. She didn't move toward her brother. She walked to Elias instead. "You were right," she said softly. "They used the fire to build everything." Elias nodded. "No, child," he murmured. "They used people. Fire was just their language." She looked at him, trembling. "What will you do now?" His eyes softened. "I'll stop carving." The hall was a ruin of noise and guilt when he turned to leave. The police were already arriving, the reporters shouting, flashbulbs painting his face in bursts of light. But his expression was calm, almost peaceful. At the doorway, he paused, looking back one last time to Coffin, his creation, his confession, his son's justice. Finch's son knelt beside it, broken, screaming at the voices that would never stop playing. "Make it stop," he cried. Elias's voice cut through the noise, quiet but commanding. "You stopped it once before," he said, "when you burned it." Then he walked out into the cold night, the wind carrying the faint echo of the recorded words. Collateral damage. The sound followed him like a requiem until it faded into the distance. Outside, dawn was breaking. Elias looked up, eyes catching the first light. "It's over, Jacob," he whispered. The wood remembered. And as the morning sun rose over the trembling town, Finch Memorial Hall stood behind him, silent now, but no longer innocent. Fire, make sure to like this channel, subscribe, and enjoy the videos.